Praise the Lord. Dear friends, welcome to the reflections on the prayer Jesus taught, the Lord's Prayer. Today we reflect on the fourth petition, namely bread. Before we start the reflection, let me read a passage from the Gospel according to John chapter 6, verses 1 to 14 that speak about the bread. The passage that tells us about the bread. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a multitude followed him because they saw the signs which he did on those who were diseased. Jesus went up into the hills and there sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then and seeing that multitude was coming to him, Jesus said to Philip, "How are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" This he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down, in number about 5,000. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign which he had done, they said, "This indeed is the prophet who is to come into the world." This is the word of the Lord. Dear friends, bread. The most important problem, mystery, issue of the world. Bread. Bread to eat, bread to sustain oneself. And the great tragedy, especially these years, is always there, but now it has become much more acute. Almost 1/3 of the world population, maybe 200 crores or more, are living without sufficient food, undernourished, below poverty level they call it. Hunger is a serious problem. People die of starvation, malnutrition, and many diseases that come from the lack of nourishment. And this in a world where there is so much of luxury and leftover. The tragedy is that on the one side there are so much waste of food, on the other side starvation and death. I remember when I was studying theology in Rome, it was in 1967. I had finished my 3rd year theology and wanted to have some work experience with the university students. And there was a community called Emmaus. Father Abbe Pierre was conducting these student camps. And I joined this camp once in a work camp. I remember the beautiful sermon Abbe Pierre told us. And it's very interesting. He said, there are only 2 types of people in the world. The people who have bread and the people who have no bread. And both cannot sleep because the people who have no bread are hungry and they cannot sleep. The people who have bread, they are satisfied, but they are afraid that these people who have no bread may get up and steal their bread. So they are also sleepless. So what shall we do? We shall do, I'll teach you one prayer, he told us. And ever since I am praying. So the prayer was like this. You pray to God our Father. Father, give us the strength, or help us to give bread to those who are hungry. Because he had already told one thing more. So the two types of people, the people who have bread have no hunger. They need appetizer and they need digestive and all the sorts, and they have always problem with the hunger. So the people who have bread have no hunger, and the people who have hunger, they have no bread. So this is the root cause of all evil, he was telling, maybe exaggerated. At the same time, he taught us this prayer. So Father, help us, teach us, give us the strength to give bread to those who are hungry, who have hunger, and to give hunger to those who have bread. That is the prayer. Give hunger to those who have bread, and bread to those who are hungry. So this is a basic problem Jesus is also pointing to, the basic problem of humanity. When it comes to the petitions concerning our needs, the first three petitions were concerning God and the kingdom. His name be holy, his kingdom be, his rule be established and will be done on earth. And now we turn to our need. Jesus focused first his attention on bread. Bread, that is the need of all. Without bread, you don't live. So bread is a symbol of all the need, especially physical need. Without whatever you may say, whatever you may preach and proclaim, but if you are hungry, if you don't give food, they will starve to death. So the first point Jesus is taking, pray to the Father. Father, give us bread. So a friend of mine was telling me, he was a Dutch priest. He came to Rome when I was studying, and he asked me one question. Michael, do you know what is the most important theme in the Bible? He knew that I was doing a doctorate in the scripture. I said, God's love. No, man, that is too sophisticated and is too. The most important theme from the first page to the last page, is bread. Bread, food. Love, you can say, I love you, but if you don't give food, what does that love mean? You cannot just live on love alone. You need food. So that's why he said, look at the chapter Bible. Before he created any animals, any birds or humans, he created the plants and fruits. The food was created, and the temptation was also for the food. And you go to the last chapter of the book of Revelation, there you see the food again. The river that flows from the seat of the Father of God and the Lamb, and on either side of the river, there is the tree of life, the food. So the food is the most important theme, and God cares for that. And when Jesus teaches us to pray, he gives us this, puts us this word in our mouth. Father, give us bread. In Malayalam, we have got the word appam, that is a bread. And appan, Abba, is the one who brings bread. Appa, appam, we call it. Father, bread. Abba, appam. So this is the most important theme, food. Without food, there is no point in preaching. Unless you, of course, there is a temptation, we'll come to that. Man lives not by bread alone, Jesus said, but without bread you cannot live. You cannot limit yourself to the material bread, but this material bread is needed. So in the first chapter, we see the trees and plants and all that God created as food for the living creatures. And then he comes to the covenant. God makes sufficient provision that there should be nobody who is hungry. No one should go without food, because God has created this world, all in it, all the plants and trees and all that is for food for all that he has created. And unfortunately, this has been taken over a few, and many are left without food. I just point to a few passages from the Bible that shows the concern of God. I take, for example, chapter 23 of the book of Deuteronomy, verse 24. Chapter 23, verses 24 and 25. When you go into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, as many as you want, but you shall not put any in your vessel. When you go into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the ears with your hand, but you shall not put a sickle to your neighbor's standing grain. Means the food for the poor, the hungry, is more important than the wealth of the rich. The world is for all. All the humans are created in God's image and likeness. Also, the animals are created by God. So He provides food for all. So we are concerned to secure the future, should not put somebody to starvation today. So He tells private property, right to private property is second to the right to survival, right to eating. For example, in chapter 26, so this is concerning the first fruits, chapter 26 of Deuteronomy. I read from 12 onwards. When you have finished paying all the tithes of your produce in the third year, which is the year of tithing, give it to the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, and that they may eat within your towns and be filled. A tenth of your produce should be given to those who have no food. So that is the know of the tithe. You can collect, but you should also be willing to share. So God guarantees that every one of His creature has enough food. And no religious exercises can substitute this. For example, in Isaiah 58, that is the post-exilic community where injustice had come back again. In the book of Isaiah, the tree to Isaiah, chapter 58, speaking about the true fasting. I come to this. What is true fasting? What does it God want? Chapter 58, verses 6 and 7. Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not hide yourself from your own flesh, to give food to the hungry. That is one of the most important commandments. God makes provision that none of His creatures should starve. And if there is hunger and starvation, it's not because there is not food. God has not because God has not given or produced food. It's because of exploitation. It's because of somebody hoarding, others not getting. The need of sharing. Come, for example, the story of manna. The people who came out triumphantly following the 10 plagues where God manifested His power and His option for the poor, liberated the people from the slavery in Egypt and led them through the parted sea of the Red Sea, in which the following enemy were destroyed, and they enter the desert and they have nothing to eat. They complain. And see what God does. Day after day, He gave them food falling from heaven. Manna, they call it. They did not know what this stuff was on the ground, and they asked, man who, meaning what is it? And Moses said, this is manna, the food God is giving. All the 40 years through the desert, God was feeding them. A great concern of God that people should have enough to eat. And when the Ark of the Covenant was made and the tent of meeting was prepared, God had asked Moses to take a cup full of manna and keep it in the ark, not to eat, but to remember and to remind the people how God had fed them. And there was one law God had given. You collect only what is needed for today. Every day God will give you food. But don't collect for tomorrow. But people were not convinced, and many gathered too much and tried to keep it for the next day, but that is all rotten. Telling them, day after day, I'll give you food. So manna is reminding us that the food that we receive from God is to be a daily bread, daily food. And this was to be a reminder for them. That's why it was kept in the ark. But what is in the ark, the people could not see. So there was another provision. When before the Ark of the Covenant, in the tent of meeting, there was a table called table of showbread. And the law was that Moses should prepare 12 loaves of bread and keep it on the table before the Ark of the Covenant, and later on in the temple itself. And this is called the showbread, the bread that is before the Lord. Reminding two things. First of all, the bread is a gift from God. God gives bread, the 12 bread representing 12 tribes. This is the food God has given. So remember that the bread you have, the bread you get, is a gift from God. Everybody. There are 12 tribes of Israel and there are 12 loaves of bread. So that should be always present. The bread of the presence also it is said. And every Sabbath they change. This bread of the presence was changed on a Sabbath day, and this bread was eaten in the temple precincts only by the priest. So this was the bread that David once asked for from the priest and took it and ate it. So the bread, God gives a provision, remember. But then when you come to the New Testament, you see again, God gives us bread. So Jesus, for example, he was born in the city of Bethlehem. The word means Beit Lechem. Beit is house and Lechem means bread, the house of bread. Very strange. It was the hometown of David, and Jesus as a son of David, as a successor of the throne of David, the son of David. He is born in the town of David, but the town is called Bethlehem. And also, it is said in the Gospel of Luke that he was laid in the manger because there was no place for him in the inn. And what is a manger? It's a place where they put the fodder for the hay for the cattle, the food for the cattle. That's a place where there will be a little warmth and be clean. But remember, the manger is a mangiare, we call the Italian mangiare, the place for keeping the food. So Jesus was born in the house of bread, and he was put in the manger, and later on he would say, I am the bread of life. So the bread becomes the central concern of the incarnation. And then when you go through the life of Jesus, you see the bread can become a temptation. And for example, the way Jesus was tested in the desert, tempted to go against the Father's plan, Father's will. So for 40 days and nights he was not eating and he was hungry, and there comes the tempter with the theme of bread. You are hungry, aren't you? Are you indeed the Son of God? Look, you have the power. Tell these stones to turn into bread and eat it, and you'll be satisfied. Not only you, the way the tempter presents the temptation is making bread into an object of temptation. Bread as not only means of survival, but a means of also domination. Maybe we come to that theme a bit later. So the word, the bread, can be a temptation, and Jesus tells the tempter, devil, that man does not live on bread alone, meaning the material bread, but also on the word of God. It doesn't mean that Jesus does not say that man doesn't need bread. You need bread, but not only bread. Not only the bread of the body, but also the bread of the soul. So two things are important here. Don't reduce humanity just to the body and the need of the body. There is also the soul, and you need the word for both. Second, don't turn the bread into an instrument of domination, an ideological use of bread. And that's what is happening today. The bread becomes a means of exploitation, of domination. Later we shall reflect on it. Then Jesus said, man does not live on bread alone, and he refused to turn stones into bread. But then we see he turned bread, multiplied the bread. That's what we saw. Jesus had compassion. When he saw the crowd coming far away from, it was in a desert place, as John says, People heard about him, people saw his power of healing, curing, and all wanted to touch him, all wanted to be healed. And Jesus asking, what shall we do? How shall we get food for them? The concern of Jesus. So that comes always, again and again, the compassion. I feel compassion for these people. I feel compassion, merciful for them, because they had been with me for 3 days. None of the gospel is there. They have nothing to eat. If I let them go home starving, they may faint on the way, because many have come from far away. So where shall we get the food? And Jesus tells him, give them something. That's in the Synoptic Gospels. In the Gospel of John, the disciples ask, where are we going to buy food? 200 denarii worth of food may not be sufficient. And they didn't have the denarii there. And there is no market where you can get all this bread. But the concern is there. Jesus' concern, give them food. So when they were hungry, Jesus knew the need, the problem of hunger, and he was ready to give them. And that was not by turning stones into bread, but making them share what they have. And here it is said, there is a boy, the disciple Andrew said, there is a boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. What is it after all for them? There are exegetes who think this is an indication that the people were on a journey and they were carrying food with them, but everybody was afraid to open the bag, because they thought, if I open this, others may grab from mine. So everybody was keeping the bread intact in their bags. And as somebody started opening, Jesus forced the disciples to give what they have. All others also opened their bags and distributed, and there was enough. I think it is a cheap understanding, may not be the true one. But it has a meaning. There is a need of sharing. That is important. So Jesus tells them, what do you have? How much do you have? They said, we have just 5 loaves. Okay, bring what you have. Instead of turning stones into bread, Jesus is first changing their mind, enabling them to understand the need of sharing. Everybody is hungry. And you give what you have. You cannot give more. But once you are ready to give what you have, God will give you the rest. So the first important thing that Jesus is teaching here, learn to share. Stand before the Father and pray, give us our daily bread. But when you ask the Father for the bread, you must remember that He has given you the hands to work. He has given you the earth to till and to cultivate and produce. Don't do it for yourself alone. Share. So as we were praying, let thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So also when we come to the question of bread, first we stand before God as if He is giving everything, and that is true. But at the same time, God doesn't rain bread from heaven as He did once in the desert in manna. That's not the way He is giving. He has given us the earth. He has given us the possibility, the know-how, and all the talents to produce bread from the earth. Work, and work so that you may have enough to eat, not only you, but also your neighbor. Sharing. So that is what Jesus is teaching, give us the daily bread. And that's how, in the multiplication of the bread, the first comes the point of sharing. And when they were ready to share what they had, they were so amazed that there was more than enough. More than enough. And Jesus says, don't waste anything. The bread is not to be wasted. Gathered together. And they wanted to. So the petition is we are told, first thing, turn to the Father with all your needs, especially the need for the food. And Jesus told us, your Father knows. Should not be anxious. Don't worry. Look at the birds. They don't see. They don't reap. They don't sow. They don't reap. They have no barns. But the Father feeds them all. But these birds also go and collect. They go and search for the food, and they collect and they eat. So it's not being lazy. If you are just sitting in the nest and thinking God will feed me, no. You have been given the capacity, work. And at the same time, don't be anxious, don't worry. The worry about tomorrow, the anxiety that makes you hoard, keep things. When you see others starving, then you cannot be a son of God. So work and share. And so when we are asking Father, Father, give us today our daily bread, Jesus is asking one thing, to depend on God, the second, work, and the third is to share. So we have to share. So we'll come to another theme also. Remember, he's not asking, Father, give my bread, but give us today our daily bread. The collective attitude, collective nature of bread, not my bread alone, but our bread. So we are a community. Then give us today our daily bread. Is it the daily bread? Is it the bread of our sustenance? That we have to see further. And what is this bread? Is it only the bread for the body? It's more. So I will see it the next day. Next episode. The bread has a deeper understanding, a wider understanding, and also it implies much more than working with the hand and sharing the food. Now let us conclude with a prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.